Hello and welcome to Tea with Nikki and welcome to Goal Power. This is a series looking at how I bullet journal, set goals and generally organise my life here in northwest London. You can find me on Instagram at hippie_Nikki. And if you would like to find out more about my knitting and crochet content, you can check out my podcast Tea and Possibilities, which is also here on this channel. Now, you've probably already seen my current bullet journal walkthrough, so now is the time to show you my bullet journal evolution. Now, I've been bullet journaling on and off for about 4 years now. I started in 2016, and as you will see, I was very heavily influenced by a lot of other bullet journals out there. When I came back to bullet journaling after my longest hiatus of about a year, I came back with a lot of my own ideas. So let's take a look at what kind of glow up I had. So here we go. This is my stack of bullet journals. There are only 3 here despite being a bullet journaler for about 4 years. As I said, I did fall off the wagon a few times. This is number 1, this is number 2, and number 3 is just in here. You'll recognise this from my bullet journal walkthrough. So let's start off with number 1. Pretty much the only thing that hasn't changed about my bullet journaling is the notebook that I use. This is still an A5 Leuchtturm hardback with the dotted grid paper. However, pretty much everything else has changed. So here, as always, we have the index, which I filled in sort of because I thought I had to, rather than because I ever really used it. Here I'm using a black fine liner pen, which I don't use anymore. We'll come to why shortly. But yeah, same as my current bullet journal, I'm still using an index. But these days, I'm getting a lot more out of the index than I got from back then. Because it was my very first bullet journal, I included a key here. So we've got the dot for the task, we've got the cross for the completed task, a migrated task, event, note, priority, research required. Now, I'm thinking of adding these to my next bullet journal because I've been using the square for a really long time and I don't know why. And this is actually quite a good reference. I also included some color coding here because I plan to color code things. I love color. I love that I can open up my calendar and see things at a glance because I can look for purple for birthdays or orange for appointments. I do love a good colour code. Next up was my master list. So this was going to be a space for me to jot down any big tasks that I needed to tackle. Not even big tasks sometimes, but like those nitty-gritty things that you need to deal with. So things like, you know, sort out paperwork, figure out budgeting, things like that, things that were stuff I needed to get done. And the idea was that if I ever had a quiet week or a day, I could refer back to this list and add it to the list for that week. This was my original financial tracking spread. I started with bar graphs where I had each of the accounts that I had and the little black lines denoted the months, and then I broke down my targets over here, including any money that I owed and any money that was owed to me. This really didn't work for me. I really love the line graphs that I've got in my current journal. They make a lot more sense. But this is kind of where that all started, and I definitely do love having a financial tracker. Next up was a gift list, so I just had things jotted down as ideas for occasions per person. It was a really useful thing to have. So this in my current journal is kind of like the Christmas list that I recently started. I had an idea that would make a great Christmas present, so I started a Christmas list. This was a more general any occasion list. So what I will probably do is, because Christmas is the next big event, I will keep my Christmas list, and when that's finished, start a general gift list for any ideas that I have, because it's quite a good idea. Now, here is level 10 life. Now, for me, I was heavily inspired by boho berry when starting this bullet journal, right down to the fact that I got this kind of turquoisey green color. And I used the fine liner, the black fine liner she recommended. I did pretty much everything she did. I loved the way she did it, so I pretty much copied her out of the gate. And this is something that boho berry did. She did the level 10 life, and I thought, I'm going to do that. So basically you mark various parts of your life out of 10, so your family and friends, personal development, blog, finances, career and biz, relationship, fun and recreation, giving and contribution, home, health and fitness. So you fill it out over here, give yourself a mark out of 10, and then you set yourself some targets to focus on. I never really referred back to this. It felt for me a little bit too static, so I just didn't use it. But yeah, heavily inspired by Boho Berry. I will link to her channel down below so that you can have a look at her stuff and you will see exactly what I mean. Then I had some long-term planning. This was kind of the early days of the brain dump. So I was kind of thinking here about where I wanted my blog and my podcast to go, what my long-term plans were. So yeah, but again, very, very static, not something I referred back to very often, so didn't really work on this. Then I decided that I was going to need a calendar spread. Now, I love the bullet journal method a great deal, but I really love to forward plan. So this was my way around it. So I drew out calendar squares for the year ahead. And as you can see, those color codes came into play because I had my shifts. This was back when I worked shifts in 2016. So we had like the shifts in orange, we had birthdays in purple, and various other bits and pieces in other colours. And I just drew out the year ahead. And I also put little reminders for the month ahead. So I was like, don't forget to go to a pick your own so we can make jam. Super useful if you have people who have their birthdays on the 1st of the month to put a little reminder in the previous month. So yeah, I drew all of that out. And then we got to March 2016. I think the intention here was for me to draw out the year and just have little like January, February, March, April, May, and I just never got round to it. And then here we have my very, very first habit tracker. Now, as you can see, it is not very pretty. My hand lettering has not improved at all. I was tracking my water intake, whether I was working out, if I was Instagramming, I was trying to build my Instagram at the time, whether I was blogging, again, I was trying to grow that at the time, and I kept my stats down here on the 1st of the month and at the end of the month. Now this was quite good because, as I say, at the time I was looking to grow my audience. That's no longer a target for me. My targets now are very much more about the content I create rather than the numbers around them. But this was super useful to be tracking beginning and end of the month and seeing like, oh, okay, well I posted most days and I blogged, you know, quite regularly. Therefore I had better viewing figures. Next up, I drew out the month ahead, which seems kind of redundant considering I'd already drawn out the whole year. But here I broke down morning, afternoon, evening and put my goals down for the month. This did not work for me at all. There's not enough room. It just looks messy. It's hard to read at a glance. It just did not work for me at all. And then we have the bullet journal pages themselves. Now this, again, heavily influenced by Boho Berry. I'm looking at it and trying to remember how it worked. I believe these were the hours of the day. So blue was sleep, green was getting up and, you know, having breakfast and getting ready for the day, and purple was like getting work. And then I would put down the temperature and what the weather was like, the date. Yeah, and I would colour it in, make it pretty, and at the time I really loved it. At the time I really enjoyed this. However, I look at it now and it looks too busy. Too busy, too fussy, doesn't quite work for me. But as you can see, I had several pages like that. Interspersed with kind of notes for blog posts and interviews that I was doing. And then we come to April. Now this is the first tracker for April, and as you can see, I have made it look a little bit different. I went just for crosses rather than boxes, so it does look a little bit neater this time. Again, I'm not massively sure that it worked for me, but you know, it was me trying every month to improve on the month before. And again, as you can see, I change things up a little bit again in April, where I just did birthdays, events, meetups and reminders. Now this worked a lot better, I have to say, but it kind of takes up 2 pages when I've already got earlier in my bullet journal the 2-page spread for April. So again, seems a bit redundant. And again, we have bullet journaling. And then here we actually have where I tried to do the 100 days project, where I think my plan was to do 100 days in conversation with myself. That tailed off fairly quickly, but that was quite fun. And these are pages that I like to come back to. They're quite insightful for where I was at the time. And it's a nice thing to have. And that's why I would never get rid of this particular journal. For May, I went for the same layout as April. So nothing to see here, moving along. I broke it down a little bit more. So I found breaking it down into birthdays, events, reminders really helped. I went for a 2-page spread, but rather than fitting the entire month down one page and spreading across 2, I broke it down into birthdays, events, reminders for days 1 to 16, and then birthdays and events, reminders for days 17 to 31. And I also used a dotted line just to make it really easy to write on. I would use this layout again. I think this was a really useful layout. I'm looking at it now and wondering if maybe this is what I should do for my month ahead planning. The only thing I would do differently is I would use my grey pen rather than the black, because I started using the black pen because I was inspired by Boho Berry, but for my taste, this is very heavy and very dark. This is kind of when my bullet journaling tailed off, because as you can see, we go straight from May to June. There is very minimal bullet journaling here, and this is because the drawing out of the temperature, the weather, and all of this stuff was just starting to drain me a little bit. Super minimal work, it's not a ton of work, but I just didn't want to. I wanted to get in, get out. And then we come to my notes for Blogtacular. I attended Blogtacular in 2016. I had a lot of fun, and I wrote up all my notes in here, and it was super useful to have. I really enjoyed writing them down in kind of a creative way as well. I found that really helped for making things stick in my head, and I just enjoyed it. However, you will see that we then go straight into July. I moved in July my habit trackers into my monthly spread. As you can see, I've got Twitter, Instagram, and blog here because I was still tracking how often I was using social media to grow my audience. And then we've got water and exercise. And if I coloured in a little square, you could see how much I had done that month. This, I think, was probably one of the better ways of doing it. But as you can see, I didn't put in birthdays and reminders. I think there is something to be said for this layout, and I do wonder if maybe I should play around with it for my next month ahead planning. So if I do, I will let you know, because I'm looking at this again and thinking, this could work. There's a lot of information on here. As you can see, I continued to move away from the heavy black lines and started using coloured pens, which made it look really fun and bright without being too much of a hassle. We have general kind of note taking. I changed up how I was doing my bullet journaling by bringing in colour into squares. So I think this is why I started using squares instead of the dots. So there you go. We have discovered why I use squares instead of dots in my current bullet journal. And I found this a lot easier. I was literally doing nothing but the traditional bullet journal method of writing lists. So much easier. But October, as you can see, October 2016 is where I begin to tail off from the bullet journal method. I did keep trying, but unfortunately it didn't quite work out for me. And as you can see, I had pretty much, you know, come to the end of my love for the bullet journal by December 2016, about 100 pages into this journal. However, we do have some details that I jotted down, you know, weekend to-dos, things like that. And, you know, I came back in February, you know, skipped January entirely, but we came back in February and I had another go at it. I started using just biros because that was what was to hand. And I kind of started to learn here that just traditional bullet journaling was a lot better for me than trying to make things fancy. I kept up with my colourful monthly spread, but on the whole, as you can see, I really didn't use it very much at all. And when I did use it, I was using it in a very traditional way. However, it didn't feel like a commitment. It didn't feel like something I was taking particularly seriously. And so, as you can see here, I started thinking about a new planner. I actually used my planner to plan a new planner, and I went and got a Kiki K. I don't have it anymore. I sold it. I find working in a binder planner really doesn't work for me at all. So yeah. But even when I had my Kiki K planner, this was a great place to doodle ideas. So that was really useful. Then when I decided that the binder planner wasn't for me, I came back to this journal in order to plan a new journal. I didn't want to pick up this one again because it kind of had been through so many incarnations. I wanted a brand new space. And I'm sure if you're watching this, you will understand how lovely it is to have a brand new, fresh space. And this was me planning out my next bullet journal. And I find planning out bullet journals really, really useful. And you will see that I often come here and figure out layouts for new bullet journals. I figure out colorways. This is such an experimental space now. I figured out habit trackers here and just how to break down new things in my new bullet journal. So let's take a look at what that looked like in my next bullet journal. Up next is my purple one. And a lot of what you see here will be really familiar. We have the index, and this time I did some color coding in the index so I could see at a glance where my goal setting pages were. I actually might come back to this. I use an inky pen so I can't highlight them, but I may use this idea, maybe with colored stars. So that is something to think about. This is a complete year in pixels. I mentioned in my current bullet journal walkthrough that I had previously used my favorite colors to be the happy colors, but as you can see, it looked like I had a fairly sad year, which is why I reversed it for my current bullet journal. I broke down the month ahead across 2 pages. I used highlighters and colored pens just to add a little bit of color to it without it being too difficult, and I just jotted down the days of the month. I left 2 spaces so there was more room to jot things down, which is why it goes across 2 pages. And as always, I planned out the year ahead. One thing I did do is I used highlighters to block off time off, which was really useful. And again, I kept putting in little notes for the months ahead. 2 months to finish hampers, because at the time, my then partner and I used to make hampers for Christmas presents. So it was a little reminder that we only had 2 months to get on that. And then I did another financial tracker, and this page was very specifically about reducing some debt that I had. I had accumulated quite a bit of debt, so I basically broke it down into what I was owed and then plus what I owed other people and on my credit card. And then I broke it down into monthly repayments, which I would tick off every month, and then I would be debt free. So that was a really great way to really reduce my debt, and it did work for me. So if you would like to know more about using your bullet journal to become debt free, I will be doing a video about that. I then came over here to track my income and my outgoings, which was kind of my way of planning savings. And that was quite useful, but I would probably do it a different way going forward. As you can see, this is when I went over to a line graph system, and I love this. If you compare it to my previous bullet journal, it is so much fresher, it's so much cleaner and easier to read, and just seeing these going up is such a rush. So I would never ever deviate from the line graph now, I think, unless I came up with a better idea. I did my level 10 life again. This time I did it in a square rather than a circle because I like neatness. And again, as you can see, rather than trying to do cool hand lettering, I just used a highlighter and a coloured pen, and it was so quick and easy to do this, and it makes it look a lot more colourful, a lot more kind of designed without actually having to put a lot of work in. Again, I didn't really use level 10 goals, so this is the last time you will see this. It was an interesting experiment, but I prefer things that are more active rather than this kind of static tracker. Next up was a self-care page, and I loved this. I thought this was such a great idea. Basically, I was jotting down things that make me happy and make me feel good when I'm feeling low or when I need a little bit of a boost. And I actually think I will transfer this into my new bullet journal. I had forgotten about this page, and this is really, really useful. So I think I will move it over to my new bullet journal because it's great to have somewhere you can go when you're feeling a bit down for instant pick-me-ups. Next up, we have Christmas. I intended here to kind of jot down savings and budgeting, and that just never happened. But we have here our hamper breakdown and other gifts. So again, as you can see, I've never been a big Christmas planner. It's fairly simple just to have a Christmas list and a gifts list. And that's all I really do now. As you can see, this was the start of me really breaking down and making it simple. Next up, I tried BuJu Bingo, and this was basically where I created a bingo board for some targets that I had. So at the time, I wanted to reach 3,000 subscribers on YouTube. I wanted to go on 3 date nights, so I put date nights in. I wanted to clear some debt. I wanted to lift 40K. And the idea was that you put all of your goals on here and you colour them in when you reach them, and then when you kind of get a bingo, you would get a prize. I never got a bingo. And the only reason I didn't get a bingo is because I just never referred back to it, and I don't know why. I think it's because I had quite a few trackers in here, but yeah, I also never filled out what the rewards were. If I had, I probably would have referred to it some more. Next up was my list of Vlogtober and Vlogmas ideas. I have done one Vlogtober, but I've never done a Vlogmas, so one day. I should probably remember I have this list because it's quite a useful one. Next up was a YouTube brainstorming space, and the idea was just to use it to stick post-its on, because then when I'd done them, I could pull the post-its off, throw them away, and have the space as just an ongoing brainstorming session, but I just never used it. Next up is some more bullet journal planning. We're only 48 pages in, but I was already aware of some issues that I was having. So I noted one of the problems was that my monthly pages were quite messy. I needed more room for holidays, birthdays, forward planning, and I came up with solutions. And the idea was if I tracked them now, I'd be able to use them going forward. I then talked about what my new bullet journal layout would look like. Then I did some more like planning for the year ahead, which again, I don't think I ever referred to really. I did put my 18 before 18 on a kind of a bingo board, but again, didn't really refer to it. So that didn't work out. I put some Instagram challenges in here as well, ways that I wanted to fill my bucket, you know, things that I love to watch that would make me feel good, things that I could do that would make me feel good. And that was quite a nice thing to refer to, a bit like the self-care tracker. And then I had some journaling pages. This is where I started putting my show notes. I did my Vlogtober planning. I kept note of all of my cals in here. I had a list of like 70 things to do in 2018, which was mad. And then I broke them down into 4 stages across the 4 quarters of the year. This is something I want to refer back to. We're in 2020, we can't really do as much as we would like to. So I'm thinking of taking the time to play around with this system and come back to you, because this was actually super useful and I got a lot done in the prep stage. You can sort out your prepping at the beginning of the year and to a certain extent some of your launches, but you need to keep referring back to it to plan ahead for the further quarters, and that's something I didn't do. But this is something that was really useful. Again, we have show notes, and then we have how I started to plan the months ahead. I started taking a double page spread, taking the page in the middle and folding it over, washi taping it down. And this is where I would list birthdays and goals. I never use the goals, obviously. But I would have the birthdays listed here with enough space that I could jot down gift ideas. And then I would have the rest of the month as usual. This made my bullet journal a little chunkier than I would like because I was folding these middle pages. But there was some merit in it. As you can see, didn't really use it towards the end of 2018. And then I began planning ahead for future bullet journals and how I could make better use of the space, better use of my time. Pretty much how I started using my very first bullet journal, where I was planning out how I would space things so that I wasn't figuring it out within my current bullet journal. And it's really good to have these spaces. So if you get to the end of a bullet journal and you've only got, you know, a handful of pages left, I recommend keeping them for planning ahead in your future bullet journal. So that really worked for me. And that is the end of the front of my bullet journal. We got up to about page 99. And you will notice that there was no bullet journaling in here whatsoever, because this one I used very, very differently. The front was for all of my planning and goal setting and kind of the static pages that I would refer to with habit trackers. My daily stuff lived in the back. Now, I really massively deviated from the bullet journal system here, but I'm going to show it to you because it may be a system that works for you. So from the back, I started breaking down things across 2 pages. I would have the week ahead. So here I would have birthdays, appointments, events, things I needed to remember to physically attend. And then over here, I had 2 lists. The first being a to-do list and the second being a list of things I wanted to mention in my podcast. So I was kind of trialing not having traditional show notes. Then under here, I would track my mood, sleep and diet out of 10 on a little line tracker. And I would then monitor whether I went to the gym, did yoga, how much water I drank, whether I had sugar or not, and whether I knit. These were the things that I would consider having a really big effect on my mental health and my physical health. So this is why I wanted to track them. And as you can see, I did that for several weeks. And what I would do is I would sit down at the beginning of the month and I would draw out the next 4 weeks so that all I had to do was sit down and fill in the to-do list. And I was super committed to it for a long, long time. So we started in July 2017, but come January 2018, I wanted to give it a fresh new look. So I stopped putting my podcast notes in here because I'd gone back to traditional show notes, and I started tracking my habits along the ends of my weekly tracker. So I would have 1 page, as always, with my weekly tracker. So I would have Monday to Sunday, but then I would pull along to halfway across the second page, and I would would use this line graph to track my sleep and my mood. So I would mark my mood out of 10 and I would put in the hours that I'd slept. And then along the top, I would write whether I'd hit my water goal, whether I'd exercised, or whether I'd been sugar-free. And that was kind of something that I found a lot easier, a lot clearer than having everything cramped up at the bottom here. And I had a lot more space to write a longer to-do list. So I worked off of a weekly to-do list with my events listed here rather than having a daily breakdown. And again, I kept using this for a really, really long time. Again, at the beginning of the month, I would draw out the month ahead, including what my goals were for that month. And then at the end of the month, I would come back and take a look back. Now, as you can see, this was more of a plan than something I actually ever executed. I had a very vague idea of what I wanted to do with the look back. I kind of wanted to see how well I'd done with my goals, anything I'd learned, anything I wanted to remember, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to get out of this, so I didn't really use it. It's kind of there in my head now that this might make a really cool thing to do, so I might think about this a little bit more and how I could utilize it going forward. And as you can see, May was kind of the last time that I really used this layout. I set it up in June and I used it a little bit, but as you can see, I didn't fill in my habits. And by the end of June, I wasn't really even filling in my to-do lists, let alone my look back. I drew out July. And as you can see, I didn't even get round to filling in the top with my kind of pretty labeling, and that was it. I did use quite a chunk for kind of, we won't call it bullet journaling because it wasn't at all, but for my daily planning. And it's probably my most used bullet journal because I only have these few pages left blank. And again, I will keep my original bullet journal because I've got tons of space in the back to plan out future journal layouts. And I will probably also use these blank pages. So I know there will be people who will be aghast about the fact that I've never finished them and that I use them as like scrappy spaces, but they are really important to me for that. And I would never get rid of them because there is a lot in here. Memory-wise, I haven't looked into these before doing this video, and as you probably heard, there are a couple of things that I thought, that's a good idea. For me, when I realise it's not working for me, I just want to move into a new journal and start afresh, and using these as planner spaces for future planners makes me feel like that's less of a waste. I feel a lot happier in my current bullet journal because of these. Basically, copying someone else's style in my original bullet journal really taught me what works and what doesn't work for me, and gave me the kind of foundation in which I could jump into this one and try something super brand new and have a completely new layout. And from there, I learned a lot more about how much time I wanted to put into bullet journaling. And how much time I want to put into bullet journaling is not much. I really want this to be a space that helps me do stuff outside of it rather than somewhere I spend a lot of time. That was really, really long, so I'm sorry about that, but I hope you can see, having seen my current bullet journal walkthrough, kind of how it developed from my originals. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that was useful. I myself really love having a nosy through other people's bullet journals, and I find it really fascinating to see how their style and how they're using their bullet journals has evolved over time. When you started bullet journaling, were you as heavily influenced as I was by other people, or did you go straight in with your own ideas? Just how much has your bullet journal changed over the years you've been using it? I would love to hear, and you know I love having a nosy through other people's bullet journals, so if you do have a video, leave a link below. But that's it for this week. Take care, and I will see you very soon for another Goal Power.